Okay, so today we're diving into something I think a lot of us have seen, maybe even been pulled into. I mean, it's everywhere these days, fitness gurus.
Oh, yeah, you see them everywhere.
And we've got some really interesting material to work with today. Transcripts from a fictional podcast called Sweat and Skepticism, The Dark Side of Fitness Culture.
Catchy title.
It is. And they actually use a pretty strong phrase in their discussion, culty behavior. So our mission today is to really break down these transcripts and pull out the important stuff, the warnings, the insights that can help us all navigate this world of fitness advice, because let's be honest, it can be a bit of a jungle out there.
It really can be.
So much information, so many different voices. It's hard to know who to trust.
Absolutely. And what stood out to me about Sweat and Skepticism was the dynamic between their two hosts, Alex and Jamie.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Okay, so you've got Alex, who's like super enthusiastic, really wants to understand the appeal of these gurus.
It's kind of like the believer almost.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got Jamie, who's a bit more cynical, like always looking for the catch or the hidden agenda.
The skeptic.
Yeah, and it's that contrast that I think makes their conversation so interesting because it allows them to explore this topic from these really different perspectives.
I like that. And it forces the listener to think critically, too.
Right. It's not just like a one-sided argument.
And the big question that kept coming up for me as I was reading these transcripts was, are some of these fitness figures and their followers, are they actually exhibiting behaviors that could be considered cult-like?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think Sweat and Skepticism does a good job of outlining what they call the cult playbook in the context of fitness.
Okay, let's get into that playbook then. What's the first tactic?
Well, they talk about this idea of creating a tribe, like building a strong sense of us among the followers.
Oh, yeah, you see that all the time.
Right. It's all about establishing this feeling that they and their followers have this exclusive knowledge about true health and fitness.
So if you're not in the tribe, you're out of the loop.
Exactly. And sometimes it even goes a step further, where it's implied that if you're not following their specific program or method, you're somehow like lesser than.
Like you're doing it wrong.
Right. And Sweat and Skepticism actually uses this really blunt example. They talk about how some gurus imply that anyone outside their tribe is basically a lazy, toxin-ridden loser.
Wow, that's harsh.
It is, but it highlights how powerful this in-group mentality can be. It makes people feel special, like they're part of something exclusive.
But it also creates a pretty clear division, right?
Yeah, you're either in or you're out.
And that can be really dangerous, I think, because it can lead to people shutting out other perspectives or information that doesn't fit with the tribe's beliefs.
Absolutely. It creates this echo chamber where dissenting voices are just dismissed.
So we've got this in-group, this tribe mentality as the first tactic. What's next?
Well, Sweat and Skepticism then talks about selling the dream, which I'm sure we're all familiar with.
Oh, yeah, the before and after photos, the promises of dramatic transformations.
Yes, exactly. It's all about tapping into people's desires for quick results.
Yeah.
Instant gratification thing.
Right. And Sweat and Skepticism makes this funny comment about how it's often like, give me $500 and you'll have abs, eternal youth, and Instagram fame.
It's like they're selling a lifestyle, not just a fitness plan.
Exactly. It's this whole package deal. And it can be incredibly tempting, especially when you're feeling insecure or unhappy with your body.
And social media really amplifies that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's showing off their perfect bodies, their perfect lives.
It's hard not to get sucked in.
It is. And then to add to that feeling of exclusivity, you often see these gurus promoting what Sweat and Skepticism calls secret knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Okay, so they use this hilarious example of a 3 a.m. kale smoothie ritual that's supposed to cure anxiety.
A 3 a.m. kale smoothie.
Yeah, I know. And Jamie, the skeptic host, she's like, it's probably just the sleep deprivation that's making you feel better.
That's so funny. It is, but it also highlights how these gurus often present these really bizarre or unusual practices as like the key to unlocking ultimate wellness.
Like you have to do this very specific thing to get the results.
Right, and it's often presented with very little actual scientific evidence to back it up.
It's more about faith than facts.
Exactly, and it plays into that whole guru dynamic, where the guru is seen as this almost mystical figure who holds the secrets to health and happiness.
Okay, so we've got the tribe, the dream, the secret knowledge. What else is in this cult playbook?
Well, Sweat and Skepticism also talks about the role of community, which is interesting because on the surface, it seems like a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, people connecting with others who share similar goals, finding support.
Right, that's the positive side of it. But Sweat and Skepticism raises this really important question. They ask whether this community is truly about mutual support, or is it more dependent on everyone constantly buying into the guru's products or programs?
So is the community genuine or is it just a marketing tool?
Exactly. And they give this example of a fitness influencer who has this incredibly tight-knit community, but everyone in the community is also buying their protein shakes, their workout gear.
So it's like a built-in customer base.
Right. And that makes you wonder if those connections would still be there if people stop buying the products.
That's a good point. It's like, is the sense of belonging conditional?
And I think that's something we all need to be aware of when we're evaluating these fitness communities.
Yeah.
Are they truly supportive, or are they just another way to sell stuff?
Okay, so we've got a good understanding of this cult playbook. Now let's get into some specific examples, because Sweat and Skepticism actually goes into some case studies of what they consider culty behavior, and I think these really bring the abstract ideas to life.
Yeah, they really illustrate how these tactics can play out in the real world.
And the first one they dive into is Bikram Yoga and all the controversy surrounding its founder.
Oh, yeah. That's a fascinating case study because despite all the issues with the founder, you still have these really devoted followers who defend him vehemently.
It's like they're completely blind to his flaws.
And Sweat and Skepticism calls this a classic cult move. This tendency to separate the inner circle from any outside criticism by claiming that the critics just don't understand.
They just don't get it.
Right, like they haven't reached that level of hot room enlightenment, as they put it.
That's so interesting. It's like they create this barrier where any questioning or criticism is immediately dismissed as ignorance or negativity.
It's a way to shut down any critical thinking and keep the followers insulated within the group.
It's very us versus them.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, so Bikram Yoga is one example. What's another one that they highlight?
Well, they also talk about the 75 Hard Challenge, which has gotten super popular lately.
Oh yeah, I've seen that all over social media.
Right, and Sweat and Skepticism describes it as this blend of mental toughness and what they call toxic hustle culture.
What do they mean by that?
Well, one of the things they point out is the complete lack of rest days in the challenge.
Like you have to work out every single day for 75 days straight.
Yeah, and there's this really strict rule that if you mess up even once, you have to start the whole thing over again.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. And Sweat and Skepticism interprets that rigidity as potentially discouraging self-care.
Like ignoring your body's need for rest.
Right, because rest and recovery are essential for long-term health and well-being.
But this challenge is all about pushing through no matter what.
Yeah, it's this no excuses mentality,
Mm-hmm.
which can be motivating for some, but it can also be really detrimental if it means ignoring your body's signals and pushing yourself beyond your limits.
I can see how that could easily lead to burnout or injury.
Absolutely, and it feeds into this all-or-nothing mindset where anything less than perfect adherence is seen as failure.
And that's just not sustainable in the long run.
Right, it sets people up for disappointment and can actually make it harder to stick with healthy habits over time.
Okay, so we've got the extreme example of the 75 Hard Challenge. What else is on their list of case studies?
Well, the last one they focus on is something we see everywhere, online supplement scams.
Oh my gosh, the miracle cures, the detox teas. It's a whole industry.
It really is, and Sweat and Skepticism uses this example of algae powder that claims to detox your soul.
Detox your soul with algae powder.
Yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it highlights how these products often make these really outlandish claims with very little scientific evidence to back them up.
And they play on people's fears and insecurities,
Absolutely. Like they're tapping into our anxieties about health and offering these quick fixes that seem too good to be true.
And the marketing is so over the top.
Oh, yeah. Sweat and Skepticism mentions those Instagram stories packed with fire emojis.
Like 12 fire emojis in a row.
Exactly. It's all about creating this sense of excitement and urgency to get you to buy.
And it works on a lot of people.
It does, because it bypasses our rational thinking and taps into our emotional impulses.
It's like we want to believe that there's this magic solution out there.
Right, and we're willing to overlook the lack of evidence or the outrageous claims because we're so desperate for that quick fix.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty heavy stuff so far, the cult playbook, the case studies, but Sweat and Skepticism also shares some stories they received from listeners, and these really personalize the impact of these behaviors,
Yeah, they bring it down to a really human level.
And one listener talks about this running group they were a part of, and they were actually shamed for eating carbohydrates.
Really, like for eating carbs.
Yeah, They specifically called out oatmeal as the devil's porridge.
Oatmeal, the devil's porridge.
I know, it's ridiculous. And it shows how this in-group mentality can lead to these really specific and often quite bizarre rules and judgments around food.
And it creates this unnecessary anxiety and guilt around something as basic as eating, you know?
Like you have to be constantly vigilant about what you're putting in your body.
Exactly. And
So-
it can really mess with your relationship with food.
And then there's this other story that's even more upsetting. This listener talks about how their coach told them they didn't want it bad enough after they missed a workout.
So
And then, get this, the coach completely ghosted them after the listener got injured.
that's awful.
It is. And Sweat and Skepticism calls it emotional manipulation with a side of burpees.
That's a perfect description. It's so spot on.
Because it really highlights the lack of empathy and the prioritization of the program over the individual's well-being.
And the ghosting after the injury is just incredibly unprofessional, and it really emphasizes that transactional nature of the relationship. You know?
Like, you're only valuable as long as you're meeting their expectations.
Exactly. And I think those stories really underscore the potential harm that can come from these guru-follower dynamics.
So given all of this, what are some things we should be looking out for? How can we spot a potential grift, as Sweat and Skepticism puts it? They offer some really useful red flags.
Yeah, they do. And I think the first one is the most obvious. If the guru is constantly trying to sell you something, that's a big red flag.
Like every post, every interaction is a sales pitch.
Exactly. It's a sign that their primary motivation might be financial rather than a genuine concern for your health.
Because, let's be honest, a lot of fitness advice online is really just marketing disguised as helpful tips.
Right. It's all about getting you to buy their product or program.
So be wary of the constant sales pitches. What else should we be watching out for?
Another big red flag is if the guru is dismissing established scientific evidence.
Like if they're saying things like, doctors are just sheep.
Yeah, or if they're completely ignoring well-established nutritional guidelines or medical advice.
That's a sign that they're trying to create their own authority and control the information you're receiving.
Right. They want you to rely solely on them for guidance.
And that can be really dangerous, especially if they're promoting misinformation or harmful practices.
Absolutely. And then there's this whole cultivation of an us versus them mentality and a lot of unnecessary drama.
Oh yeah, like the constant online fuse and the aggressive criticism of other approaches.
Exactly. It's a way to create this sense of paranoia and distrust towards anyone outside their inner circle.
Like you can only trust them.
Right. And it keeps the followers tightly bound to the guru.
And finally, and I think this is so important, Sweat and Skepticism stresses that fitness should not make you miserable.
That's a great point.
If you're constantly stressed out, anxious, or feeling guilty about not perfectly following a program, that's a huge sign that something's not right.
Fitness should enhance your life, not take away from it.
It should be about feeling good about taking care of yourself, not about punishment or deprivation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if it's causing you more stress than joy, that's a sign to reevaluate your approach.
So to recap, based on all these insights from Sweat and Skepticism, what are the key things we should be watching out for? The red flags that might indicate a fitness approach is crossing over into unhealthy territory.
Okay, so just to summarize, be wary of gurus who are always selling, who dismiss established science, who seem to thrive on creating division and drama, and most importantly, whose advice consistently makes you feel unhappy or stressed out.
Those are all excellent points. And to echo the final thought from Sweat and Skepticism, it really comes down to prioritizing fitness that's centered on genuine well-being.
Right? Not just about fleeting trends or achieving a certain look for Instagram.
It's about finding approaches that make you feel good, both physically and mentally.
And they leave us with this really powerful reminder: if a guru seems more interested in your wallet than your well-being, that's a major red flag.
That's such a simple but crucial filter to apply.
And it brings us to a really important question for you, the listener, as you navigate this world of fitness. How do you find that balance between enthusiasm and critical thinking,
How do you stay open to new ideas while also being discerning about the information you're taking in?
It's a delicate balance, but it's essential for finding what truly supports your long-term health and happiness.
And I think that's a great place to leave it today, food for thought.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.